The rain was relentless, hammering against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse like 1,000 tiny fists demanding entry. Amara Kensington stood motionless, her reflection a ghost in the glass, a woman of 38 who had conquered boardrooms, crushed competitors, and accumulated a fortune that would take 10 lifetimes to spend. Yet here she was, at the apex of her empire, feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. The phone in her hand glowed with a notification. Another message from him. "Good morning, beautiful. I know you're busy, but I was thinking about you. About that laugh you do when you think I'm not looking. About the way your eyes crinkle when you're trying not to smile. I hope today brings you something wonderful. You deserve it. D. D. That was all she had given him. Just a single letter, a placeholder for a name she couldn't reveal. To him, she was just D. The enigmatic woman he'd met at a coffee shop 3 months ago, the woman with the haunting gray eyes and the careful smile that never quite reached her eyes. The woman who claimed she worked in corporate administration and traveled frequently for business. He had no idea that the D stood for director. That she was the CEO of Kensington Global, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that employed over 50,000 people worldwide. That the modest apartment she'd shown him was a carefully maintained decoy, a safe house she used when she needed to disappear from her own life. That the car she drove to their dates was a nondescript sedan, not the armored Maybach that ferried her between meetings. He knew nothing about the woman who had built an empire from nothing, who had clawed her way out of poverty with nothing but her intellect and a ferocious will to survive. He didn't know about the father who had abandoned her at 12, or the mother who had worked 3 jobs to keep them fed. He didn't know about the years of hunger, the nights spent in shelters, the relentless grind that had forged her into the steel-willed titan the world now feared. To him, she was simply Amara. The woman who loved Thai food and hated cilantro. The woman who got lost in bookstores for hours and always bought more than she could carry. The woman who had somehow, inexplicably, fallen for a man who repaired vintage watches for a living, a man named Damien Thorne, who had 2 children, a mortgage he could barely afford, and a heart so vast and generous it sometimes made her chest ache with the impossibility of it all. She had seen him first through the rain-streaked window of a small cafe in Brooklyn, a place she'd stumbled into to escape a particularly tedious meeting. He was hunched over a delicate timepiece, his brow furrowed in concentration, his fingers moving with the kind of surgical precision that spoke of years of practice. There was something about the way he worked, the reverence, the patience, the absolute focus, that had stopped her cold. And then he'd looked up. His eyes were the color of aged whiskey, warm and deep, carrying a weight of sadness that she recognized instantly. It was the same sadness she saw in her own reflection, the one she'd been trying to drown in work and success for 20 years. In that moment, something cracked inside her. Something she'd thought was permanently sealed. Their eyes met across the cafe, and he smiled. Not the practiced, calculated smile she received from business associates, but something genuine and unguarded. It was the smile of a man who had seen pain and chosen to be kind anyway. It took her 3 weeks to work up the courage to go back. 3 weeks of telling herself she was being ridiculous, that she didn't have time for this, that relationships were distractions she couldn't afford. But she couldn't stop thinking about those eyes. Couldn't stop wondering what it would feel like to be seen by someone who didn't want her money or her power. When she finally returned, he was there, and this time, she didn't run. Their first conversation lasted 4 hours. He told her about his wife, Evelyn, who had died of cancer 5 years ago. He told her about the grief that had nearly destroyed him, and how his 2 daughters, Aria, now 8, and Sienna, now 6, had saved him. He told her about his shop, Thorne & Company, a tiny establishment his grandfather had started 50 years ago, and how he was barely keeping it afloat. She told him about her mother, about growing up hungry, about the scholarship that had changed everything. She told him about the loneliness of success, the hollow victory of having everything and feeling nothing. She told him about the walls she'd built around her heart and how she wasn't sure she remembered how to take them down. He listened with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she'd never experienced. Not scrutinized or evaluated, just seen. When she finally stopped talking, he reached across the table and took her hand. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight," he said. "You don't have to have all the answers. Neither do I. We can just be two people, sitting in a cafe, getting to know each other. Nothing more. Nothing less." It was the kindest thing anyone had ever said to her. The lies started small. She told him her name was Amara, which was true. She told him she worked in business, which was technically true. She told him she was divorced, which was a lie. She'd never been married, had never let anyone close enough to even consider it. She told him she didn't have children, which was the truth, though the admission always left a bitter taste in her mouth. But as their relationship deepened, the lies multiplied, each one a brick in a wall she was building between them. She couldn't tell him who she really was because she was terrified of what would happen when she did. Would he feel betrayed? Would he see her as the monster the financial press made her out to be? Would he walk away, taking his daughters and his gentle smile and the first real happiness she'd ever known? The thought was unbearable. So she compartmentalized. She created a version of herself for him, a version that was softer, more vulnerable, less terrifying. When she was with him, she was just Amara. Just a woman who was falling in love for the first time in her life. She let herself believe that this version was real, that the person she became in his presence was who she'd always been meant to be. And when she left him at the end of each night, she stepped back into her armored car and drove back to her fortress, the weight of her secret pressing down on her chest like a physical thing. "Mommy, can we get ice cream?" Sienna's small hand tugged at Amara's sleeve, pulling her back to the present. They were at the park, the one near Damien's shop, where they'd been coming every Saturday for the past 2 months. The autumn leaves were beginning to turn, painting the paths in shades of gold and crimson. Amara looked down at the little girl, her heart swelling with an emotion she still didn't have a name for. Sienna had her father's eyes, that same warm amber, and a smile that could light up a room. Arya, older and more serious, was already making her way toward the swings, her dark hair flying behind her like a banner. "We just had lunch," Amara said, laughing. "How can you be hungry already?" "Because ice cream isn't food," Sienna explained with the impeccable logic of a 6-year-old. "It's dessert. And you always have dessert after lunch. It's the rule." "The rule," Amara repeated, her eyes crinkling. "I see. And who made this rule?" "Grandpa," Sienna said solemnly. "He said life is too short not to eat ice cream whenever you want." "Your grandpa sounds like a wise man." "He's silly," Sienna said, giggling. "But Daddy says he's the best grandpa in the whole world." Damien approached them, a warm smile on his face. He looked younger than his 42 years, though the faint lines around his eyes hinted at the grief he'd carried. Today, in a simple plaid shirt and jeans, with his sleeves rolled up to reveal those strong forearms, he looked like something out of a dream. "Are you two plotting something?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that made Amara's stomach flutter. "Plotting?" Sienna gasped, her eyes going wide. "We never plot. We plan. Plans are different. They're more organized." "Ah, my mistake," Damien said, kneeling down to scoop his daughter into his arms. "And what, exactly, are you two planning?" "To get ice cream," Sienna announced. "Because it's the rule." Damien looked at Amara, one eyebrow raised. "The rule?" "Apparently your father established it," Amara said, smiling. "I'm not one to argue with patriarchs." He laughed, that wonderful full-bodied sound that never failed to make her heart skip. "Well, then. We'd better obey the rule." They walked to the small ice cream stand at the edge of the park, the four of them falling into an easy rhythm that felt more natural than anything Amara had ever experienced. Arya had abandoned the swings and was now walking beside her, quiet and watchful, the way she always was. Arya reminded Amara of herself at that age, too serious, too observant, carrying a weight that no child should have to bear. She'd lost her mother at 3, young enough that she didn't have clear memories, but old enough to understand that something essential was missing. Amara saw the way she watched her father, always making sure he was okay. She saw the way she protected her younger sister, fierce and unwavering. "Are you going to come to my school play?" Arya asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Amara blinked, caught off guard. "Your school play?" "It's next Thursday," Arya said, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm playing a tree. I don't have any lines, but I'm a very important tree. I'm the one who provides shade for the picnic." "A very important tree," Amara repeated, her heart aching with tenderness. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Arya's face lit up with a smile so bright it was almost blinding. She didn't say anything else, just reached out and took Amara's hand, holding it as they walked. The simple gesture made Amara's breath catch in her throat. That night, after they'd dropped the girls off at their grandparents' house, Damien's parents lived just 3 blocks away, he drove her to her decoy apartment. The modest one-bedroom in a building full of young professionals, a carefully constructed lie that was starting to feel more real than her penthouse. "I had a wonderful time today," she said as he walked her to the door. "The girls are amazing." "They think you're amazing too," he said, his voice soft. "Arya hasn't stopped talking about you all week. And Sienna asked me if you could be our new mommy." Amara's heart stopped. What? "She said it the other night," Damien said, running a hand through his dark hair. "I told her that was a big question, and we don't ask things like that until we're sure." "Are you sure?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. About me? About what you want?" He stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. His palm was warm against her skin, rough from years of working with his hands. "Amara, I've been sure since the moment I saw you in that cafe. I know it's fast. I know we haven't known each other long. But I've never felt anything like this before. Not with anyone. You make me want to believe in second chances. You make me want to hope." She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm so scared, Damien." "Of what?" "Of everything. Of telling you the truth and losing you. Of keeping this secret and having it destroy us. Of being happy and having it ripped away. Of ruining this," she said instead. "Of not being enough." He kissed her then, a slow, tender kiss that said everything words couldn't. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. "You are more than enough," he said. "You're everything." That night, alone in her apartment, Amara made a decision. She was going to tell him the truth. All of it. The lies had gone on too long, and she couldn't keep pretending to be someone she wasn't. If he couldn't accept her as she truly was, not just the soft, vulnerable woman she became in his presence, but the ruthless CEO the world knew, then she would accept his decision and walk away. But the truth would set her free, even if it broke her heart. Before she could make the call, her phone rang. It was her assistant, Bridget, her voice frantic. "Ms. Kensington, we have a situation. The Driscoll deal is falling apart. We need you at the office immediately." The next week was chaos. The Driscoll acquisition was the largest deal in Kensington Global's history, a merger that would cement her empire and silence every critic who'd ever doubted her. It required every ounce of her focus, every shred of her ruthless determination. She worked 18-hour days, sleeping in her office, surviving on coffee and sheer willpower. In the middle of it all, she completely forgot about Arya's school play. The play, the promise, the little girl who had looked at her with such hope, it vanished from her mind, buried under the weight of negotiations and deadlines. It was only when she finally emerged from the conference room, the deal signed and sealed, that she remembered. Her heart plummeted into her stomach. She checked her phone and saw the date. Thursday. The play had been last Thursday. She'd missed it. Damien had texted her 5 times. Each message more concerned than the last. Hope everything's okay. Aria's asking about you. Getting worried. Are you alright? Amara, please just let me know you're safe. I'm starting to think something's wrong. Please call me. Aria's crying. She thought you were coming. I told her you were probably just busy. But Amara. What's going on? The last message had been sent 3 hours ago. She stared at the screen, her hands trembling. This was it. This was the moment she'd been dreading. She'd been so consumed by her secret life that she'd let down the people who mattered most. She dialed his number with shaking fingers. He answered on the first ring. Amara? Thank God. I was so worried. Where have you been? I called your cell, your office, no one would tell me anything. Are you okay? I'm sorry, she said, her voice cracking. I'm so sorry, Damien. I was dealing with something at work. A major crisis. I completely lost track of time. I tried to call you, he said, his voice strained. Aria kept asking if you were going to come. I told her you'd be there. And when you didn't show up, she started crying. She thought you didn't want to come. She thought you didn't care. I do care, Amara said desperately. Of course I care. I messed up. I messed up so badly. Amara, you've been acting strange for weeks, he said. You disappear for days at a time. You never let me call your office. You never let me meet your friends. And now this? What's going on? Please, just tell me the truth. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. I want to tell you everything. But I'm afraid if I do, you'll look at me differently. You'll see me the way everyone else does. And you'll leave. I could never leave you, he said fiercely. Whatever it is, we'll work through it. Just tell me. I'm not who you think I am, she whispered. My name is Amara Kensington. I'm the CEO of Kensington Global. I lied to you about everything, my job, my apartment, my whole life. I was so scared you'd run away if you knew who I really was. The silence on the other end was deafening. She could hear his breathing, ragged and uneven. Amara Kensington, he said slowly, his voice hollow. The billionaire. The one who's on the cover of Forbes. The one who's famous for being ruthless. Yes, she said, her voice barely audible. That's me. Why? He asked, and the hurt in his voice was worse than any anger could have been. Why did you lie? Because I wanted you to love me for who I really am, she said. Not for my money or my power. I wanted to be just a woman. Just Amara. And I was so terrified that if you found out the truth, you'd see me as a monster. Or worse, you'd stay out of pity. I wouldn't have pitied you, he said softly. I would have seen a woman who accomplished something amazing. Who worked her way up from nothing. Who had every reason to be bitter and cold and chose to be kind instead. I wasn't kind, she said, her voice breaking. I lied to you. Every single day. Yes, you did, he agreed. And that hurts. It hurts more than I can say. But I also understand why you did it. I'm not angry, Amara. I'm just disappointed. In the lying, not in who you are. Can you ever forgive me? She asked. Can we ever get past this? I don't know, he admitted. I need time. I need to think. Damien, please. I'll call you tomorrow, he said. I just need tonight. The phone went dead. Amara spent the next week in a fog. She went through the motions of her life, meetings, decisions, phone calls, but her heart wasn't in any of it. She'd lost him. She'd lost the only man she'd ever truly loved, the only family she'd ever wanted. And then, on the 7th day, she received an unexpected visit. She was in her office, staring blankly at the city skyline, when her assistant buzzed her. Ms. Kensington, there's someone here to see you. A Mr. Thorne. Her heart stopped. Send him in. Damien walked in, his face unreadable. He was wearing his best suit, she recognized it as the one he'd worn to his wife's funeral. His eyes were tired, shadowed with the weight of whatever decision he'd come to make. Thank you for seeing me, he said formally. Thank you for coming, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't think you'd want to see me again. I wasn't sure I did, he admitted. But I've been doing a lot of thinking. And I realized something important. What's that? People make mistakes, he said. They lie. They hide things. They protect themselves. But that doesn't mean they don't deserve a second chance. That doesn't mean they're not worth loving. I lied to you, she said, tears streaming down her face. I kept the most important part of myself hidden from you. No, he said firmly. You kept the parts you thought would scare me away. But the most important part of you, the part one fell in love with, that was always real. The woman who reads to my daughters. The woman who taught Sienna how to tie her shoes. The woman who makes Arya feel safe enough to be her silly, wonderful self. That woman is you. The rest is just details. You forgive me? She asked, hardly daring to believe it. I forgive you, he said. And I want to start over. For real this time. No lies. No secrets. Just you and me and my girls. She jumped up from her desk, crossing the room in 3 steps, and threw herself into his arms. He held her tightly, burying his face in her hair. I love you, she whispered. I love you so much. I love you too, he said. And I'll never give up on us. No matter what. They were married 3 months later in a small ceremony at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. Arya and Sienna were flower girls, their faces glowing with joy. Damien's parents sat in the front row, his mother crying happy tears. The press was kept at bay, a carefully orchestrated security team ensuring that the only people present were the ones who truly mattered. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Sienna shouted, "We don't object. We want Amara to be our mommy forever." And the entire congregation burst into laughter. Amara looked at her new husband, her new daughters, her new family, and felt tears streaming down her face. She had spent her whole life building an empire, only to discover that the real treasure was right here all along. To love is to be vulnerable, she said in her vows, her voice steady. And for so long, I was too afraid to be vulnerable. Too afraid to let anyone in. But you showed me that the greatest strength is not in the walls we build, but in the bridges we create. You showed me that true success is measured not in money or power, but in the love we share and the lives we touch. I promise to be your partner, your champion, your home. I promise to protect your daughters as if they were my own. And I promise that from this day forward, I will never hide who I am. Because who I am is a woman who loves you with every fiber of her being. Damien took her hands in his eyes shining with tears. I thought my heart was broken beyond repair, he said. I thought I'd never love again. But then you walked into my life, and everything changed. You didn't just love me, you loved my daughters. You made us a family. You gave us hope. I promise to be your rock, your comfort, your partner in all things. I promise to never let you feel alone again. And I promise that no matter what comes, we'll face it together." Sienna, unable to contain herself any longer, ran up and hugged both of them, and Arya quickly followed. The officiant laughed and pronounced them married, and the entire crowd erupted in applause. 5 years later, Amara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She was still the CEO of Kensington Global, but she'd transformed the company into a powerhouse of philanthropy, using her resources to fund education initiatives and children's health programs around the world. Damien's watch shop had expanded into a thriving business, and he'd become a sought-after consultant for luxury brands. Arya was now a confident teenager, an aspiring astrophysicist who'd just been accepted into a prestigious summer program. And Sienna was a budding artist, her bedroom walls covered in vibrant paintings that made Amara's heart sing. Their home was a modest brownstone in Brooklyn, a deliberate choice, a reminder that true wealth had nothing to do with the size of your house. It was warm, chaotic, and filled with love. The walls were covered in family photos, the bookshelves overflowing with their collective treasures. Sunday dinners were mandatory, and no one was allowed to check their phones during meals. On this particular evening, Amara sat on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Damien came out to join her, 2 glasses of wine in his hands. "Penny for your thoughts," he asked, handing her a glass. "I was just thinking about how different my life is now," she said. "I used to think success meant having the biggest office, the most money, the most power. But I was wrong. True success is this. This moment. This family. This love. We've all made mistakes," he said, sitting down beside her. "But the important thing is that we found our way back to each other." "I lied to you," she said softly. "I kept my identity a secret because I was so scared of being rejected. I thought that if you knew who I really was, you'd run away. But instead, you stayed. You loved me anyway. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the greatest strength there is. Your identity doesn't define us," he said firmly. "The love we share, the family we've built, that's what defines us. Everything else is just noise." She leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the stars begin to emerge. "Thank you for giving me a chance. For giving me a family. For showing me what true happiness looks like. Thank you for finding me," he said. "For being brave enough to stay. For showing me that second chances are real." From inside the house, they could hear Sienna and Arya arguing over whose turn it was to choose the movie. The sound was raucous and chaotic, but to Amara, it was the most beautiful music in the world. She took a sip of her wine and smiled. This was her life now. Not the cold, empty existence she'd built in her tower of glass and steel, but something infinitely richer. Something precious. Something she'd never let go. In the end, the world had seen Amara Kensington as the ruthless CEO, the woman who had climbed to the top on the backs of her competitors. But those who truly knew her saw something else entirely, a woman who had finally learned to let down her walls, to trust, to love. And that, she had discovered, was the greatest achievement of all. The sun sank below the horizon, and the first stars began to glitter in the darkening sky. Amara leaned back, her hand clasped in Damien's, and let the peace wash over her. She was surrounded by love, wrapped in the warmth of a family that was hers in every way that mattered. She was home. Finally, undeniably, completely home.